Welcome back, class, to MUS 222, the History and Sociology of Rock Music. Today we are in Module 10. We'll be looking at 1970s hard rock and heavy metal. So when you first signed up for this class, you probably thought that this is what you would be learning about the entire semester, but that was obviously not the case. But we are going to be looking at some really crazy music at the time, and you'll see how it has evolved from 1950s to the 70s here. The blues, along with the British invasion, were very influential to the emerging style that became known as hard rock. English bands such as Cream and the Kinks, as well as American bands such as Heart, Steppenwolf, and Iron Butterfly, were among the earliest to play in this style. Hard rock songs were often based on blues riffs and power chords. The guitar is usually distorted, and all the instruments are played with more intensity or louder than previous styles. These bands also tended to include blues-based guitar solos, which were often extended in length. Because of these characteristics, hard rock is considered to be the forerunner to heavy metal. All right, take a second here, and while you're taking all of these notes, pause and listen to In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida by the Iron Butterfly for just a minute or so while you are finishing up your notes here. Sisters Ann and Nancy Wilson make up the lead vocals for the group Heart. They use distorted guitar sounds and repeated riff patterns, which can be found in songs like Barracuda, Crazy on You, and Magic Man. Another great example of hard rock is going to be Cream. Sunshine of Your Love is the song that I'm talking about, which includes this repeating bass riff pattern that you're going to hear. So take a second, pause, and listen to both Magic Man and then listen to Cream's Sunshine of Your Love. And I want you to listen for that repeated bass riff pattern, because that is a characteristic of hard rock that we're going to hear throughout all of this music. Heavy metal was born in dismal, grimy, industrial cities of England. People labored in factory jobs that barely kept food on the table. The rock that evolved from this time and place was more intense. It was very powerful, angry, aggressive, and louder than any that had come before it. Heavy metal is deeply rooted in the blues, and it has this virtuosity, showmanship type of style on the guitar. It has very extreme volume, distortion, and then you also have lots of power chords. So basically, what's the difference between hard rock and heavy metal? The lyrical themes for heavy metal revolve around something that's more dark and more sinister. So you're going to have darkness and death and evil that has no resolution, and there's not a positive outcome. There are also frequent references to the occult, to mythology, satanic worship, and then witchcraft. These lyrical themes combined with the staging, album artwork, they have these menacing attitudes, and even the clothes that they wear by the performers create a very dark type of fantasy world. Heavy metal often uses influences from classical music, most often in the form of elaborate and intricate passages that are very reminiscent of the Baroque period and composers like J.S. Bach. There is also an over-the-top display of male swagger, to the point of being theatrical at points. Vocalists often use screams and yells to evoke a sense of urgency and power. And finally, heavy metal is simply more extreme in every way than hard rock. It's louder, it's faster, it's more intense, and it's heavier. Heavy metal became popular primarily from its power and volume, and its rebellious and aggressive attitude, all of which struck a chord with its core audience. And so at that time, the core audience is going to be white teenage males who were very angry at the world. It also represented an extreme rejection of the 1970s commercial pop and soft rock styles. All right, so what I want you to do is take a second here. If you're not finished with your notes, click on Stairway to Heaven. This is actually quite a very long piece, so listening to it, you'll have plenty of time to finish out your notes here, and do that before we move on. The first band to clearly define the conventions of early heavy metal is going to be Black Sabbath from England. Now, Black Sabbath was fixated in the occult. They had low, loud, deep sound, distortion, and bone-crunching volume, taking their name from the occult novelist Dennis Wheatley's work, in fact. They were one of the first bands to use lower tunings on their guitars, which gave their power chords more depth and more intensity. So lead guitarist, there it is, Tony Iommi had an industrial accident that actually severed the tips of his fingers, which actually required him to get prosthetic tips on his fingers. So this created an intense and dark sound that was described as heavy. Visually, the band looked menacing. They would wear steel crucifixes, black clothes, and long hair, while their live shows often included burning crosses and other images of devil worship. You had lead singer, who we probably are most familiar with, is Ozzy Osbourne, who had this wailing sound that was a departure from rock singing that came before him. So our example today is Paranoid by Black Sabbath. So take a second, pause here, listen to a little bit of this song before you move on. Next, we have Led Zeppelin, and I know a lot of people are like, Led Zeppelin, I thought they were hard rock, but there are reasons why they are considered heavy metal. Now, they would actually go on to greater fame and influence than Black Sabbath. They actually evolved out of the 60s groups, the Yardbirds, and I did talk about that when we were in the 60s. They had lead guitarist Jimmy Page, and he dealt with the breakup of the Yardbirds and contractual obligations in touring by putting together a new Yardbirds, including lead singer Robert Plant, until obligations were fulfilled, and then they renamed the group Led Zeppelin. Each member had picked a symbol to represent themselves on their album, and Page's symbol actually was called Zoso, as you can see there, showed the preoccupation with the occult. They are known for their high energy stage presence, very intense rhythmic complexities, repeating riff patterns, and pioneering sounds. Now, Robert Plant used his signature screeches and moans, while Page created many new sound effects with a violin bow on the guitar strings. The band's signature piece, which you hopefully listened to, was Stairway to Heaven, and this is an epic song that slowly builds a storm of volume and distortion into a climax. It is one of the most played songs in radio history, despite the fact that it is actually over 8 minutes long. Another example for you is Whole Lotta Love, and since you already listened to Stairway to Heaven earlier, go ahead and pause here and listen to Whole Lotta Love. Deep Purple was a hard rock band that turned heavy metal, and one of the first bands to fuse influences from classical music together with other staples of both genres, basically. So you had the blues, distortion, and high volume. Their piece chronicling the burning of a casino in Switzerland during a Frank Zappa concert in 1971, that's called Smoke on the Water, is actually built on one of the most memorable riffs in rock history, okay? And definitely one of the most memorable. I have been a band director prior to working here, and my kids always learned this on their own and would play it all the time. So take a second, pause right here, and listen to Smoke on the Water. Judas Priest grew up out of the shadows of the steel mills in Birmingham, England. Lead vocalist Rob Halford adopted a leather and studs look that helped the band take off. Their 1979 album Hell Bent for Leather is often cited as being influential in the new wave of British heavy metal movement of the late 1970s and 80s. Halford would often ride a Harley Davidson on stage, and the group was known for their twin lead guitars. They were actually sued in America for backtracking a message to commit suicide, which we're actually going to explore in class during discussion time. So this one is actually one of my favorite discussions that we do. looking at the responsibility of artists and their music. But I do want to leave you here with a victim of changes. Take a second, pause right here, listen to this song while you finish your notes, and then we'll move on from there. Originally from Scotland, brothers Malcolm and Angus Young formed AC/DC, and it was named after their goal for high voltage metal, alternating current, direct current. And of course, an example here is Back in Black. This is another one that you're going to recognize the riff from. You're probably going to recognize the song. I don't know one football team that's not had this played at their football game, especially in high school. So I'm sure you've all heard Back in Black before. Another group that we have here is Iron Maiden, which was known for their dual lead guitars with punk influences. Their image was built on death and destruction, including the lyrics with mythical stories of death and torture. Their songs are still used today in video games. And so take another pause here to listen to a little bit of Run to the Hills to hear what they sound like. And our final group here that we're going to look at is Def Leppard, also incorporating the twin lead guitar style. Drummer Rick Allen actually lost his arm in a car accident, but continues to play. And our example is Pour Some Sugar on Me. This is another song I can't imagine you haven't heard before. It's definitely a classic. A lot of these heavy metal and hard rock songs that we've put up today are ones that we hear all the time, whether or not it's in on TV and movies, or just like I said, literally at football games when you're in high school. So anyway, take a second, pause here, and listen to these songs. America was also getting into heavy metal scene in the late 1960s, as it too had its share of very disaffected youth who were sick of the love your neighbor generation. One of them was Vincent Furnier that you see here, and he was a scrawny and sickly teenager that grew up in Phoenix who would become rock's Prince of Darkness and the first shock rocker known as Alice Cooper. The band Alice Cooper made a reputation in LA. They were clearing out clubs faster than a fire alarm with their bizarre original songs. They would wear this ghoulish mascara and very odd clothing like see-through pants. In the beginning of Alice Cooper's stage shows, there were these theatrics that actually distracted from their lack of musicianship. In fact, Alice Cooper's, I've seen interviews of him where he's like, I can't sing. I don't know why people wanted to watch me, so we had to put on a show, basically. And so these stage antics took on very gruesome and ghastly tones. They incorporated sledgehammers, electric chairs, guillotines, and they even had a live boa constrictor that Alice would wear around his neck. And another song that you probably are familiar with that is a classic here for Alice Cooper is School's Out. So take a pause and listen to a little bit of School's Out. One of the most popular heavy metal bands of the 1970s is going to be Aerosmith, who endured attacks from critics for being a cheap imitation of the Rolling Stones. Lead vocalist Steven Tyler and lead guitarist Joe Perry dealt with drug problems, but they completed drug rehabilitation programs in the 80s. And through MTV, they reintroduced themselves to younger audiences. And so we have a couple examples for you. I have one example, Sweet Emotions, as well as a mini bio about Steven Tyler's life. So take a second, pause right here, and watch a little bit of that. So the next group we have here was heavily influenced by Alice Cooper. KISS was formed in 1970 through ads taken out in music magazines. And the band began wearing makeup around their eyes, but over time they decided to completely cover their faces with designs that would reflect their personalities. The hardcore fans were labeled the KISS Army. Their fame resulted in a comic book, animated TV special, in-store appearances, and offer promotions through their fan clubs. which was actually quite unusual at the time. So this was the first time that we started seeing these fan clubs pop up. To date, the group has sold more than 70 million records. And of course, we have some example for you through the discography link. Discography means just a collection of their songs, and so it plays a couple minutes or a couple seconds from their songs, so you can kind of get an idea of what they sing. Also, we have a KISS biography. If you can click those links and listen to those, that would be wonderful. Van Halen emerged from the Sunset Strip bar scene in the late 70s to become one of the most popular American metal bands in history. Brothers Eddie and Alex Van Halen came across a flamboyant singer named David Lee Roth while playing in a bar band. With Eddie's unbelievable self-taught guitar technique, which included hammer-ins, pull-offs, and two-hand tapping, which were irresistible to the casual pop fans and serious musicians alike. And with the example we have for you here is You Really Got Me. Now you'll notice we've heard this one before. We heard it back in the 60s by the Kinks. So this is actually a cover song of theirs. Take a second, pause right here and listen to it. Guns N' Roses added a variety to their music with acoustic guitar, horns, vocal choirs, and synthesized sounds. Lead singer Axl Rose and lead guitarist Slash are very iconic and still copied today. And so we have an example for you to listen to, Sweet Child of Mine. Take a second, pause right here, and listen to a little bit of this. In the early 1970s, a new rock trend emerged that became known as glam rock, which encompassed an eclectic mix of style approaches. The glue that actually held the movement together was the use of flamboyant fashions, these alter ego stage personalities, and shocking assaults on traditional notions of sexuality, especially the male masculinity. The focus was on costumes and hair, often called hair metal. And this promoted a philosophy that we kind of all know today, but the philosophy was drugs, sex, and rock and roll. Glam rockers learned from Alice Cooper that it was possible to shock and challenge a rock audience by creating theatrical environments on stage through the use of makeup, staging, and props. All right, so we've got some notes here to take. Take a second, listen to We're Not Gonna Take It while you finish up your notes. Groups like Motley Crue, Poison, Twisted Sister, and Bon Jovi represent these glam bands. So take a second and listen to all of these examples, and then as you're watching them, answer this question: what do all of these groups actually have in common with each other to make them a glam rock genre? So I mentioned Bon Jovi on the last slide, so this is kind of concluding our glam rock here. But the song Wanted or Dead or Alive, I always loved watching this. When I first started teaching this class years ago, we had a wonderful video that showed a live performance and they were playing the 3-deck guitar where it had a mandolin on top, a 6-string guitar in the middle, and a 12-string guitar on the bottom. Of course, that video has gone down, and I don't have a cool video to show you, but you can still listen to the music. And I want you to listen. At the very beginning, you're going to hear a higher pitched string instrument. That's that mandolin sound. And the cool thing about this 3-deck instrument, because it's all together, is that you can actually switch from one instrument to the next at ease, and so that's really cool. So take a second, pause right here, and listen to Wanted, Dead, or Alive. As heavy metal matured into the 1980s, it evolved into a style known as thrash or speed metal, and this is an extremely fast and technically demanding form whose ominous and angry edge drew great appeal from alienated suburban white teens. Groups like Motorhead, Metallica, Megadeth, and Slayer were among the most prominent in this genre. Metallica was the most influential metal band of the 1980s. They brought a no-nonsense approach to the genre through very intricate compositions and incredibly tight instrumentals. And so the example, Master of Puppets, when you listen to this, listen for the thick, distorted guitar sounds combined with that driving rhythm. So I know we have lots of notes, so take a second, pause, listen to Master of Puppets while you finish your notes up. Another subgenre of heavy metal that emerged from thrash metal was death metal of the 1980s. It typically employs heavily distorted guitars, tremolo picking, deep growling vocals, blast beat drumming, minor keys or atonality, and complex song structures with multiple tempo changes. The lyrics are extremely intense and they speak of death. An example that we have here for you is Angel of Death. And I do have the lyrics on the next slide. So when you get done with your notes on this slide, go over to the next slide and click the link to Angel of Death so that you can listen to it. Now make sure you click the link here to listen to this and follow along with the words. So I want to leave you here with this question, and I want you to think about it before we meet up as a class, okay? So I want you to take a few minutes and think about it before we meet up and see if you feel that song lyrics can cause listeners to do things that they would not otherwise do. Is that possible? Can that happen? So think about that. Come up with an idea, and then when we meet in class, we'll have a discussion about this type of thing. I'm not going to give it away too much, but I will see you in class.